Fraud, corruption, cronyism. Symbols of injustice no matter where you are in the world. While perhaps not home to the worst examples of abuse of power, America has certainly had its share. Yet despite a reputation for freedom from government overreach enshrined in its Constitution, when the government actually does overstep its authority, people in America rarely, if ever, rise up to challenge it. But in August of 1946 in Athens, Tennessee, a group of battle-hardened veterans freshly home from war did just that, and won. What made the revolt successful, which resulted in 0 fatalities and the swift removal of the most corrupt elements of the local government, is an inspiration and worthy of careful study for anyone faced with an entrenched authority that has overstepped its mandate and infringed on the rights of its citizens.
Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
The military-industrial complex.
A new world order.
But we are here to destroy the control over the industry of other people.
I did not trade arms for hostages.
It's been time theater.
Напомни разгон гнусных захватчиков.
Мифов документив сенчиви подкаст.
Hello, welcome to the show. I'm Nick. I'm joined today by Adam and Hans.
Hey.
Hey, guys.
And we have several special guests. We have Masonius Rufus and Mankin from the Rebel Yell podcast.
I definitely appreciate you guys having me on, guys.
Happy to have you. And they brought with them a friend of theirs from Identity Dixie, Marcus Hale. How are you, Marcus?
Doing well. Good evening, everybody.
And we brought these guys on today to talk about an interesting episode in 20th century American history, which is known as the Battle of Athens. Would you guys like to give some background around this?
Yeah, we talked about this, me and Nick Mason offline beforehand, and I just mentioned, along with several, great ideas I had for your show, that I thought Battle of Athens would be a really cool story to discuss, which, without going too much in the weeds, basically in 1946, Eastern Tennessee, there was a issue of political corruption in McMinn County, Tennessee, and a bunch of ex-GIs got fed up with the political machine, and they decided to use their military skills as well as a local National Guard armory to go and put their skills to use in taking a political machine down.
Well, specifically, there was an election that was being held. They were counting the ballots, and they were doing it in secret, and the suspicion was they weren't counting them properly. I believe that was the trigger event that they thought they could claim as the reason for going after these guys.
Well, there's definitely a lot more that led up to it, but my understanding, and I know Marcus has confirmed a lot of these details, but the poll watchers there were deputy sheriffs. And again, we'll talk about there was all kinds of corruption involved with that local sheriff's office. And those poll watchers, the deputy sheriffs, physically went and took a bunch of the ballot boxes away from some of the committee personnel who were actively counting the ballots, and that initiated a lot of the this brush fire, as it were.
Yes, that's. There was, there was quite a bit of a buildup, and I mean, you see basically an area that was a
Democratic Party in Tennessee. The Democratic Party was, a corrupt system. It was run like on a boss system, like Tammany Hall or something. The a similar system in Missouri was the Pendergast machine was behind Truman, and he went all the way to the presidency. Anyway, the like his black lieutenants are still running for office from Memphis. Crump's lieutenants in Memphis. Anyway, this county, McMinn County, had been about 2/3 pro-union and pro-Republican, since the war. And yet the Democratic Party was controlling it, and was controlling it through corrupt means. So I guess that's the setup for it.
Yeah. Which I'm sure requires a huge digression into how parts of Appalachia were pro-unionist, or at least anti-Confederacy during the
Oh
war.
yeah, just real quick. East Tennessee has always been Republican. Middle and West are Democrat. Memphis is the corrupt city that that dominates the Democratic Party in Tennessee. And it's way out in West Tennessee on the river. The Appalachia kind of wanted to stay out of the war, and the first vote in Tennessee to secede, they voted to stay. Because Appalachia did not want to go into the Civil War. But after Lincoln called up troops, Tennessee voted again and decided that they would secede after all. But this county, McMinn County, had given about, 12 regiments to the Union and only 8 regiments to the South. So Appalachia was pretty divided.
Yeah.
But this one was divided toward the Union side.
And that went up and down the entire mountain range. I mean, obviously, West Virginia becoming a separate state, that's a good example of that. But there were pockets throughout Appalachia where you had a pro-unionist, or probably more accurate to say they were just anti-Confederate, because hill folk just don't like being told what to do. And that's why you tended to have large or certain Republican pockets throughout Appalachia up until the switch of the parties in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, it was a hatred of there's a hatred of flatlanders among Appalachians. Johnson was famously from Tennessee, who succeeded Lincoln after he was assassinated, and he did not have much love for the plantation owners. And anyway, it's just Appalachia was divided in the Civil War, and it was often not considered, or it really became Southern because of the deep poverty of Appalachia, because of Reconstruction after the war. They missed out on all the productivity that the rest of the country enjoyed. Yeah. So that's why they're considered Southern today.
Yeah.
So it was my understanding that this guy Shelby, or E.H. Crump, he came out of Shelby County, and he was the Memphis mayor who got thrown out of his office during Prohibition because he was corrupt and wasn't enforcing Prohibition rules. Is this accurate?
Yeah, that sounds right. If I remember correctly, Shelby County is where Memphis is, and it's famously corrupt.
Yeah.
To this day,
like he was involved in just some kind of Prohibition racket. I'm not sure what the details are, but he was thrown out, and then he used a lot of the state political connections he had acquired over the years to become involved in just, I guess, broader Tennessee politics. Somehow being thrown out made him more powerful. And by the time the Battle of Athens rolls around, he's one of the most powerful people in Tennessee.
Yeah, he had bought off, separation of powers couldn't stop the Democrats. They basically had the sheriff, Cantrell, in their pocket. And so that's how they were ruling the county. And McMinn County, for those that don't know, it's in the extreme East Tennessee. It's at the foot of the mountain. It's very beautiful county, by the way.
So maybe to help people understand why this event happened, we should go through some examples of the corruption that this machine was committing.
Go ahead.
No, I just had the sort of stopping people for not being drunk and then charging them. I mean, I read that on Wikipedia, but I'm sure you guys have more details. But basically, they were compensating their police officers or their deputies for the amount of fines that they issued. So obviously, there's this horribly perverse incentive to just ticket people, and that's going to get on everybody's nerves.
Which is interesting. Again, not to have the great digression that I'm famous for, but large parts of Appalachia, they still had their deputy sheriffs and deputy constables more or less paid by this system into the 1970s. Where famously, some of these states, their cops didn't even become part of the civil service system until after 2000, because I was living there at the time. They were paid for fines as well as arrests, so it created an incentive to arrest people for drunkenness. Were these people drinking? Well, again, these are veterans, these are GIs. We're notoriously apt to drink, especially if we don't have to drive a vehicle. So I'm sure that plenty of these guys were drunk or drinking or intoxicated to some degree, but it's not like they were creating problems. Famously, the deputy sheriffs, they would go and board buses that were driving through, pull people who were, not from the area off the bus and arrest them, put them in the jail for public drunkenness. And again, maybe they were or they weren't drunk, but again, these are people who were in many cases in their private homes, or they were on a bus, so they weren't engaged in any kind of problems whatsoever. In many cases, they were actually unconscious in their seats, who were drug into the system there and thrown into jail.
Yeah, like justices of the peace used to be jokingly referred to as justices of the plaintiff, because if you came to them for like a civil issue, they would almost always award damages to the plaintiff because they got a part of that as fees. So you can see how it's sort of a corrupt system. The old it's almost like a fiefdom. You get this feudal position and then you use it to mulch the population. And then you owe your boss that helped you get your feudal position.
Yeah. I'm sorry if I was cutting you off, Marcus.
Oh no.
Okay. And this system still persists in some place. One of the things to understand, most people today, when you go to justice of peace or you go to a small claims court, it's an unenforced judgment, right? Nobody goes out and makes sure you get whatever that money is. The best thing that happens if the guy just doesn't hand it over, you file it with a credit agency or a collection agency, who 9 times out of 10 doesn't collect because it's not worth their time, and they just file a report with a credit agency. But into the 1970s, several of these justices of the peace had their own police forces. Constables in Kentucky and I think Tennessee, and these were in addition to the regular deputy sheriffs and sheriff's offices. So yeah, they were corrupt, and they had a means to enforce their corruption at a barrel of a gun.
Yeah, and counties used to be run by justices of the peace. Like they would gather together for the county court, and the man who oversaw them, or the president of the commission. This wasn't even a county commission. It was usually called a county court. They would call him the county judge, the presiding executive, even though if he judge. And this causes confusion to this day throughout the United States because, there are several different local government forms, and a lot of people have tried to professionalize local government by having county commissions and such. But back then this was a county court system. So the justices of the peace would all gather from different baronies in the county, and they would preside, and they would be paying for road work or whatever, or they would be deciding where county money went, in other words. So
yeah, and they were very much fiefdoms, and they originated literally as fiefdoms in the beginning, and like many other systems, the definition of corrupt largely depends on who's able to extract the least from the process of providing order and security. And in McMinn, Tennessee, we see a case of essentially those parasites become actually parasitical and destructive to the process, as opposed to lots of other counties where they had the common sense not to create many problems where there weren't any to begin with.
Yes.
Go on, Marcus.
It was basically a hostile takeover from the way the history reads out. You have this democratic machine that moved in while all these veterans went off. They went off to go fight World War II, and basically these FDR Democrat crony, just this mob, comes in and sets up shop. Yeah. And they do things like they get a Democratic U.S. representative out of McMain County, because you've got the sheriff counting the votes. Yeah. And he's going to rig the election for the Democrats and for FDR's buddies.
Yeah. A digression there too. In the South, especially, there were longer occupancy residential requirements in order to be on the voting rolls during the Great Depression. It used to be not only did you have to live in the state for X number of years, frequently you had to live at that same address for more than a year, which meant if you were drafted, obviously you weren't going to be voting at that time. But also the huge number of people who were migratory, or they lost their homes in the course of the Great Depression. Well, even if they stayed in the same area, frequently they weren't to continue to be on the voting rolls because they had moved residencies, actual physical addresses in that time.
Yeah, my understanding is that Cantrell in the late 30s becomes mayor of this town, correct? and he then starts sending his guys to the state legislature. He sends one guy, George Woods, who was a friend of his from Etowah.
Yeah.
Etowah. Okay.
Oh,
and
well, Marcus, how do they say it over there? You've met them.
Etowah.
Etowah. That's how I'd say it too.
So my understanding is this is kind of a rich area. This is Cantrell's a born rich kind of guy, and George Woods, his buddy, is also a born rich kind of guy. Is it still an affable part of Tennessee?
I don't know that affable or high income was necessarily accurate so much as those are the people who ran the local political machine. I know I stepped on you.
Well, you've basically got a few rich guys, and you've got a lot of dirt poor people. In fact, Etowah to this day is an extremely impoverished area. You've got some very beautiful old houses in Etowah, but I mean, you'll see like 5 or 6, broken down cars, and chain link fences with pit bulls and everything, and meth labs, and it's very run down. And it's very sad. It was basically Etowah exists entirely for the railroad, which still runs through there, and it's just it's very interesting. I mean, you've in McMinn County and both Etowah together, you've got a lot of really poor people and then some very rich people, and the Cantrells, where at least half of the Cantrells were in that very rich and privileged area. The Cantrell that I've actually known, he referred to it as there were the Cantrells and there were the Cantrells. He said he was from the Cantrells because he didn't have a penny to his name, nor his family, so he had to pretty much work his way up from poverty, and he's actually doing pretty well now. But he had some just interesting stories like that.
Yeah, and Athens is the biggest city in McMinn County, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
County seat.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, East Tennessee counties are weird. Sometimes they'll put the sheriff's department out in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
But I think McMinn County is the same way. I think the sheriff's department is equidistant on a lonely highway. It's equidistant between Athens and Etowah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Rural sheriffs like to do that. They don't like to be near wherever the seat of power is. They like to just put in the geographic center of the county, which is often near nothing.
So one of the ways that they were holding on to power was sort of a gerrymandering and redistricting. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Like they eliminated 14 justices of the peace and just had 7.
Yeah,
and they were their men, Crump's men.
Yeah.
So I imagine there's a lot of bootlegger money involved in all this, gentlemen. I'm not sure though, but
yeah. At least, getting started.
Was this like a big part of Southern politics during Prohibition? Was who could get the bootlegger money?
Much like we said before, nobody connected to the Battle of Athens talked about it until the statute of limitations went away. You'll find with bootlegger money, nobody really talked about it until later in life, when they were completely certain nobody could come for them. Like my father-in-law's father, my wife's grandfather, famously was involved with him at one point, but he didn't talk about that to the last few years of his life.
Yeah, my buddy's grandfather literally told him where the still was on his deathbed. Yeah, all those G-men became like ATF. All the revenuers became ATF, right, by then.
Yeah,
because by the war, Prohibition was over. But moonshining was still going on, and there's the famous Bootleggers and Baptists coalition. The preacher's preaching against drunkenness, but he's got a still, buried somewhere.
I can't help but think of the film White Lightning.
Yeah, well, this is that country, so.
Yeah, so you can see how the fiefdom would work. There's money to be had. There's fines to be mulched from the people. There's moonshine stills to be ignored by the right people, etc.
And much like we said before in the past, a peaceful, equitable administration a lot of times were the ones who extracted the least amount and sort of let certain things go on because they weren't really hurting anybody.
So given the passage of time, especially after the first actual documentation of this event, other than just hearsay, how reliable do you think this documentation on Wikipedia, for example, would be for this event?
Marcus?
From what I've read of the Wikipedia article, it's generally accurate. The it's been a while since I've read it, so I mean, it seems like I don't know if it still says this or not, but at one point I could have sworn I remember it saying that that the armory, the National Guard armory, was broken into to get the weapons, but they were given the key by the supply sergeant. It was that there was a lot of people very friendly, to this, because I mean, you're talking about a pro-Republican area that basically got took over by friggin' FDR Democrats, and I mean, it just, they were not happy about it.
Yeah, and they're putting their guys in jail.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that there was an attempt to get proper voting machines, and the Cantrell Democrats had the McKinn County Court abolished at one point, and the voting machine bill. There was a bill to get these voting machines, and they basically said, "Well, we want to save the county some money," so they just forewent getting proper voting machines and did it by hand.
Yeah, wink, wink.
Yeah,
and so allegedly there was also DOJ investigations into McKinn County from 1940 to 44, and none of them ever went anywhere.
Yeah,
I wonder why.
Yeah, I'm guessing that this is kind of Southern Democrat influence to keep the machine going.
Yeah, well, that's part of it. Also, understand the first generation of FBI agents were political appointees, so many of the middle managers at that point wouldn't have been actual cops. They would have been, political appointees who would have known which side their bread was buttered.
Well, go on, Marcus.
I apologize for interrupting again. Yes, the thing you're looking at here is you're basically watching the modern Democratic Party come into its own. This is not the same Democratic Party from the Civil War, or from the 19th century. I mean, we're basically, you're getting this machine, this mafia that exists to this day. I mean, they've put on this politically correct facade, but it's they're using the same tactics, and it's just kind of one of those things that has not changed. They found something that worked, and you've basically got the Democratic Party is just run by mobsters, and this is just an example where someone actually called them out on it.
There was also the issue of during the war there were 2 GIs who were shot by Cantrell's people. Is that the case?
I know there was at least one. There was a armor that had been shot. And I'm not really sure about the details on it, but I know that there was a deputy that was charged for that.
Yeah, that was the colored guy. I think they called him colored back then. He was shot during the actual when the battle began on the day of the election, right? During the war, about 3,000 GIs were gone, and some of them came back on leave, and they were killed by some of these deputies. I think that's what you're talking about, right?
Yes, and many more of them were, drug into the jail and gotten the shit kicked out of them by blackjacks and batons.
Yeah, I mean, I read that between 36 and 46, obviously, when Battle of Athens goes down, a lot of this ends. They had started collecting fees worth $300,000 in just a decade time.
Yeah,
and so it was a lot of fake drunken arrests, or it was mostly a racketeering effort. So they would essentially go to local stores and they'd say, we want some protection money, and I don't know how they kind of framed it, like, who are you protecting you from?
Yeah.
But the sheriff Mansfield was working hand in hand to make sure that everyone in the town knew, all the factories, all the gas stations, everyone had to pay the mayor.
Yeah, and not only were they fee-based, because they were fee-based, they essentially had the ability to enlarge the police department as big as they wanted to on the drop of a hat, as long as they could get the fees to pay those guys. So allegedly, there were around 200 something deputies at the time of the election when the Battle of Athens happens. So it's and keep in mind, similar departments in similar counties down the road may have only had 30 or so at that time. So they were kicking the shit out of a lot of people, and these are people who had just spent years killing people, and they had access to weapons.
Yeah, I have a quote from Bill White, who was one of the main veterans who fought in this in this ordeal. And he came back and he said there were several beer joints and honky tonks around Athens. We were pretty wild. We started having with the law enforcement at that time because they had started making a habit of picking up GIs and finding them heavily for most anything. They were kind of making a racket out of it. After long, hard years of service, most of us were hardcore veterans of World War II. We were used to drinking our liquor and our beer without being molested. When these things happened, the GIs got madder. The more GIs they arrested, the more they beat up, the madder we got.
So do we want to actually talk about the event itself? Or Nick, did you say something?
No, I didn't.
That was me interrupting. But yeah, I agree with y'all. We'll start talking about the event. I know we said before that the match, as it were, the spark, as it were, that ignited this, Marcus, was during the actual election, the poll watchers themselves were primarily deputy sheriffs. So what happened is a group of deputy sheriffs went into one precinct while members of the local committee, whatever they're called, the election committee, were counting the ballots, and some deputy sheriffs physically took the ballot box away from them, and that was what really started the revolt that day. That's my understanding.
Yes, and they took it to the county jail, for proper counting, which that was all under guard. They had the streets blocked off. They made it a very secure process to where they could go and count their votes. As Stalin said, it's not who votes that counts; it's who counts the votes.
Yeah, exactly.
So how did these veterans and other friends of veterans get together and actually organize what sounds like a siege of the police station? Was there like a town crier? I mean, there's no cell phones back then, so what exactly was like organizing everybody together like this?
Well, they had started a political party. By this point, the GIs had created their own party. It was just called the GI Party, and they were going to put a veteran in. And I mean, the whole purpose was to topple this sheriff.
Yeah, and I think they essentially won every single district. After the sheriff's votes were thrown out. But I mean, that was the organizing thing. Is they had a party, they had communication networks because they were actively meeting and actively campaigning. So I mean, those people like that are always out there on election day communicating, even if it's before radios and telephones are readily available. So it wouldn't have been very hard for them to spread the word so soon.
The Tom Sizemore movie, the film, kind of the family-friendly version of these events from I think the 90s, has the party formation process as being this sort of emotional back and forth between 4 or 5 main guys who then just sort of riled up the veterans. Is that really how it went, or was there a lot more real veteran involvement where, was there a lot of family drama? It kind of portrays it as certain people with their family drama overcoming their problems, not necessarily forming a political movement.
I think that from what I've been able to find out just from people around here, it seemed like the support was overwhelmingly in favor of the veterans. And because I mean, you're basically looking at the sheriff came in almost as a usurper, as you'd call it, and these were people that have been voting Republican since the Civil War, and no one was really happy with the political machine that had just kind of moved in and took over.
Right.
Certainly, but an armed revolt is something that's very unusual in American history, something like this at least. And that's kind of what my question is getting to. It's like, who was inspiring? Was there like a leader, or was there discussions beforehand that if this sheriff does something, this is what we're going to do? It seems kind of a hard thing to ask normal people to just suddenly get your gun and go down to the police station. That's kind of an intimidating thing. Maybe it's different because they were all veterans, but it's interesting to me how this happened, because it seems unusual and probably hard to recreate if there was corruption like this again.
Yeah. I think in 2018 it seems impossible to our worldview.
Oh, definitely. I mean, people are playing Call of Duty more than they are at the shooting range, so It's it's a very unique thing, and so that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, how did this come together?
Well, it's like you had a bunch of guys that had just gotten back from the greatest war in the history of the world, and they just their give a damn was busted, and I mean to them getting in a fight with a bunch of deputies wasn't a big deal. They've been fighting Waffen SS and you know and the Wehrmacht, some of the best trained, most battle hardened soldiers the world had ever seen. They had been fighting, and what was some deputy sheriffs? They were nothing, and they were belittling and treating them like dirt.
Yeah, and keep in mind, a lot of times, if these guys who are doing a fairly masculine job, like policing during the war, the implication is they were either very old people or they were, they were draft dodgers or something. So it's not just getting the shit beat out of you when you're a much better man than them. It's getting the shit kicked out of you by, a much lesser quality of human being in the process that, makes people that much angrier.
Was there any issue of settling scores that they had with these guys prior to being sent off to the European Holocaust?
In the 1934, you had the bonus army.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So there were a lot of veterans that were upset. Those were World War I veterans. These veterans they had gone off to war. About 3,000 of them they had come back, and so you have all these draft dodgers from the other political party, running the county like a corrupt political machine. And it was so brazen that they just steal the ballot boxes from you even after you form a party and run a G. So this was the last straw that there was no way that they would ever get any representation or their votes would ever count if they didn't, throw a fit.
I think they, in this case, the guys with the GI Party and their supporters realized something that political theorists always say, which is, voting in elections are deferred violence, and they realized deferred violence wasn't going to work. So it was up to actual violence.
It teaches you a lot of stuff. Go on, Hans.
Well, they had a Knox Henry, who was one of the main leaders of this. Adam was asking who the leaders were. He was one of the primary leaders, and he ran against Cantrell for the sheriff's seat. When Cantrell learned that this guy was going to be running against his man Mansfield, he came back and decided to run for the office of sheriff. He was state senator at the time, and he pretty much humiliated Knox, and he came up with all kinds of rumors about him, and they exploited him. And I think that part of the animosity that bred the revolt was having to do with the way that Cantrell was so blatantly playing politics, pretending to run for an office he wasn't really going to hold, just to make sure that his guy stayed in power. Because everyone hated Mansfield because he was going around and hitting people over the head to get money out of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I think you asked this before if clannishness had anything to do with this. This is, a small group of families versus a large group of clans or something, the opposite sides, where it's a family affair, so to speak. But, this reminds me of why, the Veterans Department was created. It was to keep veterans happy.
Yeah.
And to keep them beholden to the federal government because they're dangerous. They had been dangerous in 1934. The whole bonus, after the bonus army, you have the business plot where big businessmen are like, we're going to use veterans, to create a dictatorship.
Yeah.
Because if, FDR, to overthrow FDR's dictatorship, in other words. Well, FDR's dictatorship, by the way, a lot of these places, did not get to see a lot of money during the Great Depression if they were solidly Democrat. The way money was spent in the Great Depression is, any place that could go Republican got money. So
hence the Tennessee Valley Authority.
Right. So the TVA is a way of buying off East Tennessee. And anyway, the more corrupt, the more corrupt hold that the Democrats have on the party, the less money you're going to get from the federal government. So, this highlights a lot of issues. It's like the veterans are dangerous. You better let them think that their voice matters or they'll overthrow you.
Yeah. or at least shoot up your town in the process.
Yeah. What's amazing to me is how professional they were about the revolt. I mean, I guess we'll talk about that a little bit later, but there's really a feeling of, justice was served, no hard feelings, bud.
Yeah. Now that they're in charge, they didn't need retribution.
Yeah.
One of the deputies, and I'm going to paraphrase his quote because I've read this several years ago, but he was more or less quoted as saying, we in our county, we had men who had just knocked over the two largest war machines in the history of the world. He was referring to, Germany and Japan. And he said now they were surrounding our, our jail and shooting at us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there was sort of preliminary organization for a militia. Bill White, who I think was one of the other leaders, basically said that we need to have a bunch of guys together. He had 60 guys, and he gave them pistols. If there's any sign of obvious vote rigging, we're going to step in at the polls and stop it.
Yeah,
I think that's the key ingredient. There was a precursor plan in order for there to be a catalyst to organize around. So if it was just completely ad hoc after the fact, I don't think it would have come together. But there was that critical mass of people ready to go, and then people followed.
Yeah. So they had that nucleus of ground organizers who knew people who could, quickly assemble the 30 to 60 guys that supposedly were there.
And that's why you need leadership. I mean, you can't just do this abstractly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so much talk about leaderless resistance was horse shit. You can have unmanaged resistance, but leadership, or every movement has leadership.
Well, you can't have one leader. I mean, that's a huge critical point of failure. But you need to have a lot of people who are willing to take others forward where they don't want to go.
Yeah. We need leaders, plural, and we need a lot of them.
Well, this begs the question of why this doesn't happen more then. Is it the American Legion? Is it the VFW? Is it the veterans, VA? How do they keep veterans from forming local political parties and overthrowing the whole rotten racket?
Well, I would tell you as a disabled veteran, the fact that I can get $3,000 a month after surgery and I lose all that money if I'm incarcerated does a great deal to keep me from going to war with any establishment.
Buying you off with the VA. That seems to be
I've been bought off. I'll be completely honest with you.
Well, I mean, that seems to be the ticket. That's how they do it. Is there another way? I mean, could you imagine if the American Legion were politicized?
The problem is that this was probably only possible in a pre-modern surveillance era. There's no way guys could have been allowed to meet up at local bars, at cookouts, each other's houses, without anyone really noticing or being able to draw connections, because you have a tight-knit community. All these guys are friends.
Yeah.
So no one assumes anything of it.
That's a very valid point, though. I would understand that Appalachia, large parts of Appalachia were effectively stateless into the 1970s. So yeah, it's a case where, the geography of Appalachia and a culture where it's easy to do things because there's nobody really there to pay attention to you.
Well, that and the governor at the time. I mean, the McMean County reached out to the governor of Tennessee to ask for assistance. The governor called up attempted to call up the guard, and the guard basically just said, "No, I'm not fighting other veterans." Yeah,
apparently the state adjutant general, basically his version of it is he heard conflicting reports and ordered a stay put order until further information was heard, which is a polite way of saying there is no fucking way I'm getting these guys up that hill.
Yeah. I think it was read into the congressional record in Washington, D.C. It's amazing how little comment there is on this stuff. There must have been a lot of talk behind closed doors about it.
Yeah, well, again, like I said, it's like people waited until the statute of limitations were gone to even talk about it. And it's like the exact numbers. There were 30 to 60 people allegedly surrounding that the jail. So we had 1 to 2 infantry platoon size, or platoon size element, 1 to 2 infantry platoons, and it's not even clear that anybody really knows who the hell because everybody made sure not to talk for a good long while afterwards.
Yeah, that's what struck me as well. There were no prosecutions from what I can tell. I mean, were people just kind of like doing this code of silence thing, and the police were too afraid to go after these guys after what had just happened?
The police, once they owned the sheriff, understand they were the cops. Again, it's not like you have bureaucratized police departments in Appalachia until decades later, in some cases until the 21st century. So,
and no CNN whipping up the nation to call the FBI in.
Yeah, allegedly when the things first kicked off, when the deputies came in that took the ballot box, there was at least one reporter who saw it, and part of why he sided with the deputies is apparently he had originally been arrested for drunken disorderly by those cops before, and he was not going to take their side in it, allegedly.
Oh, good old fashioned, yeah, got a feud going on. I think they also got some dynamite, didn't they, Marcus? That was like the.
Well, it is a mining town, so maybe it's not too far fetched.
I'm sorry, you were going to answer, Marcus?
No, I was just saying, yes, there is quite a bit of mining that goes on.
So they got explosives
in the Etowah area.
Yeah, I know the movie it specifically talked about dynamite being a key part of the plot. I don't know how realistic that was. I know at least one of the eyewitness statements, they talked about Molotov cocktails and they talked about throwing bottles down, but they essentially said because of the angle, because they were on a hill aiming down, they couldn't get a good arc on anything, so they gave up on the Molotovs because they realized they couldn't hit anybody.
See, that's an important logistical point. In the dramatization of this event, it's not a hill. It's essentially where Cantrell and Mansfield hold up the jail. It is just flat with the rest of the area around it. It's like in the middle of the town.
Yeah.
And they essentially pull off like a Rainbow Six style breach of the front door with like, the token Hispanic demo expert from World War II. I don't know how accurate that is.
No, it's made up. Yeah. Well, again, special operations guys who do this for a living do train a lot for that because people get hurt a lot doing that kind of thing. So yeah, that's not what happened. Apparently there was an overlooking hill near it because again, it's Appalachia. There's hills everywhere. That's all Appalachia is a series of hills. And they got up on one of the hills and shot down. Go ahead, Marcus. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was kind of more of a knoll, and just the way the street was. And I mean, I drove out there the other day and just kind of stood there on the knoll and just looked in that direction. And I mean, it's
grassy knoll.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
And it's kind of hard to. It's not a very good knoll because there's other buildings obstructing the view. So I mean, even and they even mentioned that in the accounts that they have very limited view.
Okay.
To be fair, the knoll in Dallas is pretty underwhelming. So if nobody's ever actually seen it up close,
I'm sorry to digress this.
No, that's okay. Well, I mean, I might be wrong, but from what I understood is, they were firing through the windows. Was it a granite structure or what? Marcus, do you remember what the sheriff's department was back then? The jail.
It looks like some sort of granite structure. The hard part about it is that of course that building is now long gone. In fact, even the courthouse is gone. You kind of have the knoll, and you can look down the avenue, and you kind of see where it used to be. And that's about it.
Yeah. Was it a single-story structure or 2 stories?
I think it's 2.
It's a 2-story structure.
Yeah, from what I understood, it's like they were staying away from the windows and counting the votes inside, and they thought they wouldn't dare charge us, and that's when they got the dynamite and blew the damn porch off the place. And then they surrendered. Cantrell's troops surrendered. So I think that's basically the climax of the battle. I'm sorry to spoil it, but I think that's how it went. The dynamite was key in scaring the shit out of them.
No kidding. It's like shock and awe.
Yeah.
And they left, and as far as like the civility of this revolt, the GIs actually, they didn't make a complete siege of this jail. They allowed the back door to be remained open so that the deputies could escape.
Yeah. Which is a very
votes. Yeah.
Well, that's a very good tactical point, because if you have up to 200 guys or however many were actually in the building, if you didn't have a way for them to run away to, you're going to turn it into a last stand where there's a lot more firepower in their end instead of your end, and that's not good if you're the attacker.
So having a limited objective was very wise. They just wanted the ballot boxes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
this
no
is
one
really
was
good
killed
tactics.
during this. Correct?
Yeah, no one was killed. No. That's they were very humane siege. You know?
Yeah, on neither side. Apparently there were lots of injuries. I can't find anything about specific injuries. I don't know about you, Marcus.
Still don't know if they were gunshots or just maybe shrapnel.
Well, yeah, the colored guy was shot, and then I think they blew the porch off to scare the crap out of the deputies.
Yeah. Sure as fuck would make me give up.
Yeah. And then that's when they surrendered, and then they got the ballot boxes, and then there were no reprisals. So I mean, they were a very just revolution, you know.
Yeah, well, they disarmed the assholes and sent them out of town. Apparently, a large number of those deputy sheriffs weren't even from the county itself. Something they had
brought in like 200 guys from outside the county.
Yeah,
enforcement.
And again, if you're from outside the county, maybe you're veteran. Probably not. Maybe you're more likely a draft dodger. The fuck are you going to go and die for somebody else's election that doesn't give you anything?
Right. Yeah. So I think that a lot of the drama started when there was a shot that went out at a polling station, and Mansfield pretty much, or a guy named Gillespie was shot, and they took him to the squad car, took him away. So Mansfield closes the precinct entirely, stops people from voting. And then he takes this wounded voter, who's also a veteran, to jail and throws him in a jail cell. So they have a hostage now, essentially. And then some veterans start showing up, and they realize what's going on. Again, this is before cell phones, so people are kind of just driving around trying to warn each other what's happening.
Yeah.
And then 2 more poll watchers who were GIs get held hostage.
Yeah.
By Cantrell's guys. So now the veterans are realizing that not only have the ballot boxes been stolen, but several of their men have been either wounded or are being held hostage. So then they pretty much just give up the pretense of this is going to be just another election. So they they don't break in. They're handed the keys ever so nicely by a former National Guardsman, and they're given they take 3 M1 rifles, 5 Colt 45s, and 24 British Enfield rifles. Believe that was the inventory they took. And then I think you had mentioned they also took Thompson guns.
Yeah, and some of the photos too, I see guys looks like they're carrying M1 Garand carbines, which I've never seen listed on the list of weapons they carried. So, and again, this is Appalachia. Everybody owns guns, so I'm sure plenty of guys brought their own weapons with them.
When this starts going down, do you have townspeople joining the veterans in the siege? Do they start adding to the firepower, trying to break in?
I've not heard that, but what I do know is that it turned off. It was almost like the Civil War, like when you hear about picnickers coming out to watch. You had people coming out. It turned into almost a block party where all these sympathetic people came out, and they were bringing sandwiches and food to the GIs, and picnicking, and like a tailgate party. I mean, it was like mentioned earlier, they were not fond of this sheriff. There were several people not fond of this guy.
What a strange idea where the actual community pulls together to represent itself. I mean, what a concept.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing what Appalachia could do before opioids and meth.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the ethnic dynamics of Appalachia. What peoples made up and still do make up Appalachia?
I'm sure I'm stepping on somebody, but Appalachia, it's predominantly Scots-Irish. You've got pockets of ethnic Germans throughout. You've got pockets of, quote, Cherokee, unquote, which frequently are people who are mostly white with some kind of non-white in their ancestry, which may or may not be American Indian. Tennessee and North Carolina, you got a few Amerindians, the actual Indian populations, but that's mostly what it is, and it's extremely white. Rufus or Marcus?
Well, actually, both both of us we've we've kind of done some research in that, and yes, predominantly in that area. I've actually been to the cemetery in Athens before, and it is a predominantly Anglo. Just the names are predominantly Anglo and Scots Irish. Right. You see a lot of names that are more Anglo than not. I mean, it's surprising. It's like it's almost like New Englanders came down there and lived.
Yeah.
It's the railroad tracks. Yeah, they came along the railroad.
Well, that and then the Scots-Irish population, because these are people sent from the Scotland border region into Ulster and then forced into the United States, and many of them were ethnically English and not Scottish when they first got sent. So that accounts for some of the names.
Any Greeks live there? I mean, it sort of begs the question of like,
what
Tennessee? Yeah, I know, but it's like Tennessee's got all this like Greek architecture and stuff. What's going on with that? Because I mean, it's like it's a lot of Anglos.
There seems to be a very small but strong black population, and you see them in the old cemetery. You see a lot of English. You don't really see a whole lot of anything else. Yeah. You might see the random, German name. You might see the random Scots Irish name, but it was weird. It was like just looking at it, it's like there's a lot of Yankees buried here. Is what I came up with. And I mean, it was a pro-union county. Yeah, you have the railroad, in Etowah. So I mean, that probably factored into it.
Yeah.
If you read Albion's Seed, there's good evidence that the Cavalier Anglos, which was a specific subgroup of Englishmen from the main English heartland, I think mostly from West England, this group, were some of the original pioneers down south. And they're the ones who made up a lot of the southern aristocracy, more so in the Carolinas and in Georgia and in Virginia. But a lot of the English in that area were probably descendants of the English that went directly to the southern colonies.
That's true, but I mean, they tended to be mostly in the lowlands and the places where you had plantation agriculture.
Right.
Marcus or Rufus.
Right.
I was sort of joking before about the Greeks living there. I'm pretty sure there's not too many, but I mean, it is interesting.
A lot of Roman LARPing.
Yeah, so in Nashville, there's that enormous reconstruction of I guess it's the Parthenon from Athens, I guess. So is there sort of a kind of Western civilization, kind of Greek revival cultural movement going on in that part of the country? And I'm kind of asking you guys, like, why is that? Like, is there an attempt to try to build up the culture, to kind of compete with the Eastern establishment? Like, what is the motivation behind it?
I think part of that had to do with the founding, the revolutionary generation, because there was a strong aristocratic Republican element that was strongly influenced by Rome. So I'm assuming that's part of it. Musonius or Marcus?
Well, the South did have a neoclassical revival in the 18th century. Running up to the Civil War.
Yeah.
You've got a private Christian college in Athens, Tennessee. It's a Wesleyan college. Other than that, it's not very. Other than the university, it seems that there's not a whole lot of other influence. It's just the South in general did have this neo-Greek, movement, and you see a lot of that in the architecture, with the columns on the plantations and so on. So I mean, the movement was there. As far as Athens, you don't really see a whole lot of plantations. It seems like it was involved. It seems like there was a lot more mining, and there was farming, but the farming seemed to be poor people doing it.
Yeah, and plantation agriculture, it needs flat area with access to a lot of water. So Appalachia always had a different economic system from the lowland South.
How about race relations between whites and the coloreds?
Yeah. Well, it's Appalachia. I mean, they tend to not be a lot of them compared to the lowland South, and they tend to be fairly isolated, don't they, Marcus?
Yes, I think there were probably some sharecroppers involved. You had the black farmer that was shot. You basically had the sort of weird carpetbagger black alliance going on in the Athens area or McMinn County area at the time. That you've basically got you got black guys that are voting Republican. They've been voting Republican ever since they were ever since the Civil War ended, and they were at that time allied with the Republican Party in McMinn County. It's just at that time, Republicans were using blacks, to get the votes, and it's shifted over to nowadays, where you've got the Democrats making that push, which they've apparently taken it to a whole new level.
Was there a real Hispanic contingent in Athens or near Athens? And that was part of the dramatization as well. In fact, they play like a crucial part.
Really? I don't know. I'd be surprised.
There could. I mean, I don't see it. I mean, like I said, at the cemetery, there weren't any Hispanic names that I saw. I mean, not from that time period. That there may have been that one-off odd Hispanic guy. I mean, sure, anything's possible, but it was.
Yeah. He thought he was looking for El Dorado, but he found coal instead of gold. So he
Georgia and Tennessee have or Alabama, excuse me. Alabama has a few pockets of Hispanics. I mean, pre-20th century Hispanics, but in the southern part of the state, and this is the flatlands, it's not in Appalachia, and mostly these are guys who date back from the Spanish settlement there.
Let's get a little further into the elderly colored farmer Tom Gillespie. In some of the material I've read on it, they very much played this up as,
of course, they want to make it about that. Yeah,
right. Well, I mean, it obviously was significant in the sense that it was someone got shot, and the guy who shot the patrolman who shot him was the only person to face any significant charges.
Yeah,
he did serve some time in prison. And in some of the literature, they make it out like the GIs were indignant about the racism, so-called racism of the patrolmen. But as we've discussed, the corruption was colorblind, you could say, right?
Yeah, it was definitely targeted against people who wore green uniforms.
Well, it's the same thing as you have nowadays. Whenever Democrats get pissed off and cry racism whenever we ask to see a voter ID card. I mean, it's just at that time the Republican Party, they needed that Negro vote. I mean, that was important to them in McMinn County, and it's going to shift on over.
Yeah.
When everybody marches to the left in the 60s and 70s, then all of a sudden it's the Democrats that are needing the black votes, and it's just. It's just whoever just happens to be using the black man at that time, to make, to get their agenda, and
I prefer to think of it as just, us as white Southern racists. The dirty secret is we always have black friends, and we're not really energetic about that.
Well, I've always told people that the black folk that I meet in the South are much easier to get along with than the ones elsewhere in the United States. And
just avoid the inner city.
Yeah, no, I mean, Memphis is another planet, but it's just the ones, that are just normal people. They're very polite, and as opposed to a lot of the urban blacks that you'll meet in the West Coast and the East Coast, or in the Midwest, even up in Chicago and places like that. I don't know, like in Detroit, it's kind of an interesting dynamic because everybody is black. And so when they sort of see a white person, it's kind of like a novelty. It's not really a threat. But when you have these more kind of diverse cities where there's not a clear majority one way or the other, you get this very weird tension. But in the South, there seems to be kind of an understanding that is much healthier in my travels that I've seen.
Yeah, that's the thing about the basically the Southern history with the black man. It's been we pretty much know about as far as you can take it as far as racial relations. We get along, and we figured out probably how to get along with blacks better than any other part of the country. And I'm not saying it's harmonious, but I'm saying we knew about as far as you can get with it, and we stopped at a certain stopping point, and that's just the way it is. I've known black guys in East Tennessee that wore, that drove pickup trucks and listened to country music. Very southern men.
Oh yeah.
They were black, and but you still didn't really want to get involved in all their family members. They,
Yeah.
we all got along, and
Yeah.
we didn't kill each other, and we called that a win.
Yeah. And again, understand Appalachia always has significantly fewer blacks than the lowland South too.
Well, I mean, this is a unique little piece of Southern history, but what do you guys take from this as lessons for the right, broadly speaking, in America?
I think the biggest thing I take from this is they're afraid of us for a reason, and that's not always good for our side because they're afraid of us that they're going to use force against us if we present a threat to them. We're capable of doing a lot if we actually, put effort into organizing for something other than goddamn rallies. But
well, I actually wrote down some of the conditions that I thought made this event successful, and I want to contrast it because somebody mentioned there's never been another armed revolt. I'm not exactly sure. It depends on how you define it, of course, but I'm not exactly sure that's true. There were these two big standoffs that happened in the past few years during the Obama administration in Nevada and in Oregon. And they didn't, the Nevada one actually seemed to resolve itself somewhat peacefully, but the one in Oregon, that guy got shot. And
I do think, Adam, I do think you need a majority non-FBI partisans in order to call it a revolt.
Yeah,
well, I'm not sure. The FBI is not revolting, but are you talking about the opposition not being composed of federal agents?
Yeah.
Okay, but let me go through my list here, and then we can talk about how it compares to more current events. Obviously, also Waco. That was a disaster, and then also Ruby Ridge. But they weren't really revolts. They were just like, why are you guys here? Leave us alone. And then the federal government just rolled tanks through the area. But okay, so what I observed about this that sort of struck out at me was obviously local support. People are bringing sandwiches. Okay, that did not happen when these guys in Oregon took over the wildlife preserve, which is kind of a weird target to begin with. But people were, holding up signs and protesting and getting on NPR talking about the terrorists. Okay, that didn't happen here. So there was local support, clearly. There's also this obvious example of just call it corruption, call it evil, call it just injustice, where the sheriffs literally took the ballots with them and okay, we're going to do a vote count and be all honest about it. Yeah, right. So it was sort of obvious. Okay, so I call that the trigger event. There's also the shooting of that guy, which is horrible. For any police, the event may be sort of apocryphal, but it was okay, he was trying to cast his ballot and they shot him. That seems almost hard to believe, but if that's true, obviously that's pretty unjust. I think there was also a big cultural tailwind supporting veterans at the time. It was a huge war, so all the men were off doing it, and then also there was cohesion between them because they were all from the war, and then you come back and contrast it with these sort of lazy fat police officers who didn't serve their country, quote unquote. And let me just finish up. There's a couple more, but there's you could speculate as to all these things, and you probably just need a couple of them. But I think the biggest other thing that probably helped this happen was everybody was trained, they knew what to do, and there was enough of them. So I'll let you guys comment, please.
If I may, the big thing that that we can take away from here and apply it to modern politics that affects the alt-right is compare this to Charlottesville. In this situation, you had a sheriff, you had a corrupt city government and county government that is controlled by guys in Memphis, basically by this Democratic machine that goes all the way up to the national level of the Democratic Party. That's pretty much the exact same thing you're running into in places like Charlottesville. When you got guys that are going there to do the Unite the Right rally, you're not just going up against local government. You're going up against a machine that goes all the way up to the national and even international level. When you start bringing into George Soros and these other Jewish characters. So that's what you're dealing with. You're looking at the Democratic Party as it was and as it is now.
Yeah, and well, I mean, they overthrew their own corrupt government. Any rally that national rally that the alt-right or some right-wing movement tries to do, they're going to look at those people as outsiders, to the community.
Yeah, whereas these were actual members of that community.
Yeah.
The other thing that Masonius pointed out earlier was that these veterans had a very clear, simple, achievable objective. Unlike the guys, again, in the Oregon standoff, where they seized this piece of land and then they were just sort of like holding press conferences, but it was not really clear what they wanted, or even if they were allowed to stay there, like what would they do? I mean, like, okay, let's just pretend the FBI didn't show up. Now these guys are holding this useless piece of land with a watchtower on it. What the hell does that accomplish, and what does that say? I mean, it's really kind of a stupid thing that they did, frankly. And in this case, it was something for the community, and actually there was a demonstrable value that they added. And I think this is very important for anybody who wants to sort of go up against the system. You have to add an improvement to people's lives, normies, call them whatever you want, but there's no reason for them to want to support you, because if they do, they get demonized by the media. So you have to give them an incentive to want to support you. And in the case of this community, it was obvious. I mean, you're getting less, fines thrown at you for things you didn't do wrong.
Well, so, why did you have these Nevada ranchers want to go all the way up to Oregon to fight? I mean, that's why you didn't get the community support, because it wasn't the community.
It was a lot like the thing that happened in Nevada, which was way more legitimate, in my opinion. But sorry, go ahead. Please elaborate if you could.
Well, I'm just going, the difference, you've got these guys that go from Nevada up to Oregon. I mean, and, bottom line, they were not the brothers and sisters and fathers of those people in Oregon, that are making the stand. That's why you didn't have that support, because it's a bunch of weirdos from out of state coming in to spar off against the federal government. And on top of that, you've got this. Their whole plan is to go and set up and be sieged by the government. That was basically their end goal, was to get surrounded by federal agents and maybe get killed. And make some press conferences, like you said. Meanwhile, the goals there was, hey, we're going to surround the jail. We're going to take the jail. We're going to get the ballots. End of story.
Yeah.
Well, this reminds me of like the activist pacifist debate with NRX and with right wing activists. What did the guys in Athens, were they actually activists? Because they didn't want their faces on the news. They didn't want the news to cover them. They blended back into the population once they were done, and then they didn't talk about it.
It wasn't about their egos. It was actually about helping their community.
Yeah. We can't even name them. We don't know. Between 30 to 60 guys, and now that 3 to 5 dozen people, we can't name anybody other than the guys who are running for office and the 1 or 2 guys who talked about it after the fact for the news.
Right, and compare and contrast that with Charlottesville and with the Oregon incident. What Lemur, or Lahare, whatever, I can't remember the name of it. You've got some guys showboating. They're showboating, and then it turns into a clusterfuck. When friggin' armed government men show up, ready to kill their asses. That's the problem.
I mean, you have armed insurrection is just the most extreme expression of resistance to the system. And the problem that you see everywhere in America is that institutions and organic community structures that should serve as the basis for resistance have been taken over, corrupted, and people are given debased culture and all these things that make them weak. And so to me, it's hardly unsurprising that there hasn't been many repeats of this, at least recently.
You guys have gone into these guys were organized. There was a fellowship, and I guess they're doing a really good job of buying off vets and making sure. Which vets with their high suicide rates, that's a community that's suffering right now. And I like to, when people ask why, I like to point out, well, it's actually depressing being a veteran in the United States today, the late empire. That's why they have a high suicide rate. They got broken families.
What do you think the root of the depression is today with the veterans? Because I think in contrast with Vietnam, people don't demonize the veterans as much, but I think their path back into civilian life is still difficult. So, and maybe it's also the feeling that they were lied to more so than maybe even Vietnam. These are my guesses, but
they have been lied to. They've never been told how to function in society. All the way growing up, our school system rigs us to be mindless, automatons. Our whole point is to, go and get a job in a cubicle, or if you're too dumb for that, guys like me, you go and you eventually join the military, and you go off and you serve, and you do all this time. The military doesn't actually teach you how to survive in a real world civilian environment, and you come back home, you're unprepared. You don't know anything about how to actually manage finances and deal with the realities of life.
Yeah. Those are all correct things, and I definitely agree with those. And part of those are exactly like you said, you don't fit into society. And it's not like, even 20 years ago, and when I was a kid in high school, 20 years ago was not that long ago, where you had, an organic community or people you could go and talk to, and places to go and find a job when you were a veteran who immediately came back. Good fucking luck if you're a white guy in your 30s trying to find a job in any industry in the world, where, your last 10 years has been wearing a goddamn uniform for the government. And there's nothing like a community. There are no church groups that look out for you. This society does more to take care of felons reintegrating into society than it does for veterans. And I don't say this to beg for shit from anyone, but this society doesn't give a flying fuck for veterans, and they take violent people, which we were violent people because that's part of our job, and puts them back in a world where they have no means to get, above, one or two levels above the bare bottom rung of society. And it wonders why these people are angry. It's like, you take some of the best and brightest people and you make them very violent, and you give them nothing and no opportunity and no way out in the world, and we wonder why they're depressed. We should be happy they're depressed, because this anger is the kind of shit that blows up countries.
Yeah, these veterans weren't alone, though, and they had a community to fight for, and they fought for it, and they got it. I mean, do veterans have a community to fight for anymore? I mean, do they have something to fight for when they come home?
Yeah, exactly, the United States. I mean, part of why Identity Dixie Party as Southern Nationalist is something that occurred to me, as a lieutenant, is, the United States is not a nation. There's no folk here in an American or a German sense of the word, so
no, the
we're in a
closest
situation
it ever got to is probably, right before they passed that act in the 60s. I mean, the demographics are just completely against the concept of a folk.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
There is one exception, and that is with the National Guard. You've got guys who grew up in that community and, drilled at that unit in the town. And I mean, you've got, whenever those towns throw parades or whatever, throw Veterans Day parades, they go to the local National Guard Armory and they say, "Hey guys, can y'all donate some Humvees and so on like that?" And they're like, yeah, sure, we'll bring them. We'll bring some troops in. This is the sort of thing I've seen many times in places like Athens.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's probably why they're scared to death of the National Guard. Ever since 2008, it seems like they've been trying to take the big toys, the big weapons from the National Guard and turn them into, MP bag fillers.
Yeah. Well, they don't own any Apaches or attack helicopters anymore. It almost makes you wonder why.
Alabama Guard had a special forces unit. I mean, they used to be. They used to be mainline Army units.
Yeah, and that's definitely part of the situation. And it's not like it wasn't Desert Storm, where you had units famously never graduate from NTC, so they couldn't be deployed. I went to combat with National Guard units when I was in Iraq. The unit that the brigade that kept the roads open was a main National Guard unit, and to this day, if I pick up a tactical radio, and I hear somebody with a Boston accent on the other end, I know that we're safe. I know somebody's going to keep those roads open and make sure somebody comes and gets us if I'm wounded. But the Guard has become very dangerous to them because they've turned it into an actual fighting organization like it originally was.
Right, and the other thing about the National Guard is you've got guys that have been in the same unit for maybe a decade. You've got, as opposed to the active army where you've got this rapid turnover of just new guys all the time. You've got guys that have been in that community forever. They've a lot of times they've turned down promotions because they don't want to drive on the other side of the state, to pick up that E7 rank. because they're going to lose money, so they end up like deferring their promotion so that they can stay at that unit and not lose money.
Yeah, I've known staff sergeants who used to be regular Army captain for just that reason. They wanted to stay in that unit. And so, they continue to be competent, and they have more competency than even a regular Army soldier sometimes.
Yeah, they've trained on the same equipment. They've trained with the same guys for years upon years.
Yeah.
And I mean, they may not be like, 300 APFT, scorers, but they know their shit better a lot of times than active Army guys.
Yeah, they can keep the roads open. They can put a 50 cal into action to kill insurgents.
Okay, well, I mean going back to the original, the Guard sounds like they would actually side with the community if there were some sort of civil strife in the United States. So that's why the federal government doesn't like the Guard or is scared of the Guard.
Yeah, I know I'm cutting people off, but there was a National Guard unit that was there at Charlottesville. And you'll notice nobody ever saw them on TV. And I can tell you exactly why. It's because the state adjutant general told them beforehand, you're not fucking getting involved with hitting anybody with those batons. Stay back. This is a cop's job. Don't get involved in local policing.
And that's true. They're always told to kind of stand by, stand back. It's the only time the National Guard's going to get called in is when like the police have been just absolutely overrun.
Yeah, they don't want another Kent State.
Mm. Well, so, I mean, I guess we were asking, like, why don't we have more of, these battles of Athens? And I guess that's where it led us here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ideally, we could always say some of these places, apparently the veterans came back and kicked guys out, and, we never hear about the peaceful answers, right? And I can't name anybody, but maybe that's the case. But I would say, the Battle of Athens, you had this veterans political party that became the nucleus for that ad hoc militia. And odds are lots of times, they came back and they places co-opted veterans and found a place for energetic, hardworking people in the system, which isn't always bad because, systems persist if, people who would otherwise become malcontents are co-opted into it. So,
well, let me ask you guys, because a lot of you guys are veterans. Do you think that it's a good thing for a young man today who maybe needs some structure in his life or wants to learn, I think they specialize in the military. You can become a mechanic or something like that. Do you think it's still a worthwhile endeavor to pursue, fighting for, a government that puts you in the Middle East to fight for another country? I mean, I'm sort of answering my own question a little bit, but I want to support the Guard concept because it's sort of a local thing. Like they go out and they put sandbags up if there's a flood. I'm like, okay, I can get behind that. But at the same time, they're still thrown into Iraq. And so I don't know. Like, do we really want to get behind this organization?
Here's the thing. I actually encourage people to join the military today, whereas for years as a libertarian, I didn't. And I settled on this as my answer. Is it worth it? Well, none of those things are worth it. None of these wars are worth it. Whatever you're doing is probably going to be a meaningless waste, and you're going to come home damaged to some degree. That's reality. Why do people do it? Why do I did it? Why would I go do it again? I think becoming a warrior is something metaphysical. It's something existential, and it's something that certain people are called to do. And unfortunately, there's only one game in this country right now, in this time and place, where you can go and do that. So that's why I join. And I see certain high caliber people I think need that experience because that's the only place giving them that experience in this civilization at the moment.
You have got to train and test yourself. You've got to join. I mean, I know that you're going off to fight unpopular wars, but I mean, I don't care what it is. But you get guys fighting a war that's actually for a really good cause. There's going to be days that it's going to suck so bad. It's going to be so difficult to endure. You need guys that are used to embracing that suck. You need guys that are used to that military mentality. I mean, there's a reason why gang members are now infiltrating the military and sending their thugs in. They end up using these tactics, to fight their other gang members. You need guys that are battle hardened, and like he said, it's the only game in town.
Yeah, I think it's great training. But like Macon said, I mean, you could come back hurt, in your mind and body or both.
You will come back hurt in your mind and body and both, and it's a question of how. Sorry to cut you off.
No,
but those are the guys. Those are the guys that fight wars. They're broken.
Yeah, well, the training is so good. I mean, I have to side with, get in there, and this is a big topic or a big controversial topic among veterans because some veterans, they're really hurt, and should they even tell young men to go in? And so that's a big open debate. I'm glad you brought it up. I have to side with, go in there and get that training and get that experience because, in this post-military life, I could tell someone who's gone through that character building experience. I just can,
Yeah.
I mean, because, I've been talked to like a freaking dog and there was no escape, and people in civilian life seem to think there's an escape. They can rage quit or they can purge. They just escape, and the military vets are the ones that stay.
Embrace the suck.
Yeah.
Didn't I seem to recall you mentioning at one point that you joined up rather later in life than most? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, I joined up after college, so I had to, say no to OCS to enlist in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
So and it was good training. I'm glad. The feeling I have afterwards is, it was good, but it's good that it was. I'm glad that's that sums up military past for me.
Yeah. There's no was without the is, and the is really gonna suck.
yeah, but just the things that I learned from it, there's no substitute. You can't get that in college or anywhere else.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Well, you, Masonius and I think it was Dark Enlightenment, you guys had a great podcast on colonies. I think it was near the end of last year, which I listened to, and I'm very much a fan of like going off and building as opposed to trying to reform this decaying husk of a system. And I think one of the things that I wrote down that you guys were talking about was one of the things you learn in the military is that you can't do things by yourself. You have to have a team. You have to work, as a specialist within a system that is greater than the sum of its parts. And I thought that was a good point. I've learned that in other areas of my life, not in the military, but I think that's a point worth emphasizing for people who are considering it or haven't had that experience. That it's a true lesson that you brought up the example of Rambo. I mean, it's sort of a fictional example, obviously, but that wouldn't work, in the real world. You have to have a unit. You have to have a group of people who are working together.
Yeah. Special operations in the real world focuses on turning nobodies in third world countries into their teams, which is the opposite of Rambo. And I know,
99% of the military is dealing with bullshit, being told to do bullshit things that make no friggin' sense, and just dealing with it. It also teaches you how to deal with people that you really don't like. I mean, these aren't your friends. I mean, it's like the closest thing is like having a very dysfunctional family. And I mean, you can't really rage quit from them. You've got to sit there and work through it. You've got to work with these individuals. That guy might be a shitbag, or he might be just have a chip on his shoulder. But you come up with ways to make this fucking machine work and run. And I mean, that's something I think the alt-right could benefit from, because otherwise we get into these pissing matches, and we don't really understand how to reconcile differences and how to coordinate.
I think it's ridiculous how many, they'll say that ideologically individualism is cancer or libertarianism is cancer, but in their personal interactions, collectivists rage quit like individualists.
Yeah.
They claim, we're collectivists, or, we're identitarians. And it's like, I don't think you know what that word means.
Yeah. There's no change in Weltanschauung or worldview in the German sense, which I know I sound really smart, like I'm sniffing my own farts right now, but that's really the case. These guys are still ANCAPs in terms of, petty personal bitching. And
I mean, you can't tell a Nat sock in his personal interactions from a libertarian. It's like you still think there's an escape, son. There is no escape. We're the only show in town. You can go back to the normie wastelands if you want to and wander the wastes. But you'll be back. So don't rage quit. And purging people, where are they going to go? You know, it's when I'm just talking specifically about like online interactions.
Yeah.
You know,
our pet peeve.
Right.
Yeah.
We've we supposedly believe in this idea that we're being genocided and being replaced, and that Western civilization is under siege. But hold on a minute, I'm gonna go and have an affair with my best friend's wife.
Yeah.
that was so embarrassing. I couldn't.
Yeah, let's go there. Shit.
Well, I mean, it's just that's the kind of crap you deal with. You deal with these weird. You get with these moments where you're supposedly fighting for your survival, but then we go off on these weird ass tangents and do like just freaking white trash trailer opera, and it brings down the whole movement.
Yeah.
Well, that's that is a talking point toward the ego of leaders. Leaders are servants. That's another lesson you got to learn.
Yeah.
This idea that a leader is someone who gets his butt kissed all day and that he's worshipped and we have a personality cult. That's crazy. Yeah. When I hate to bring up the Amish all the time, but they
I bring it up all the time. Go ahead, man.
Yeah. They choose Amish bishops, older Amish bishops by allotment. They'll put something in the Bibles that are stacked up, and then the men come in, find their Bible, and if they've got like the bookmark, then that means they're chosen. Anyway, like they don't want to be bishops, right? And you shouldn't want to be a leader because it's the first servant. You should be a leader because you're compelled. Because you care about your people so much. Yeah. It's not, I get to have my butt kissed now.
Yeah.
No, it's exactly right. Have you guys seen that meme, the 2-panel thing, where it's like, here's a leader and here's El Jefe? The leader is the guy who's pulling with the team this big block of stone. I mean, you imagine ancient Egypt. And Jefe is the guy sitting on the block in a chair with a little parafoil or something over his head and with a whip in his hand hitting the other people. That's a dictator. That's sort of what people sort of fantasize about when they see all these sort of World War II dictators and like, oh yeah, I'm going to join the alt-right. That'll be me. No, actually, it's a lot of work, and you have to work with other people if you want to build anything.
Yeah, and ironically enough, I mean, classical aristocrats, I mean, as much as we may belittle them, the English royal family and aristocracy had that mentality that
that's right. They would send the guys to the front lines.
I mean, if you ever watch the show,
not a bunch of neocons
Crown,
sitting in Washington telling other people to do it.
I like the series The Crown because I mean they really cover the idea of aristocracy as leadership. But one of the themes throughout there is you're anointed by God, and this isn't a good thing. That means that you've been chosen to be the person who bears the cross, so to speak, for the people you lead, and that's what leadership is. That's what command is. You're the person who signs up for everything to be your fault, even when it's not, because guess what? That's what leadership means. And the reason we send commanders for prison when their troops, do illegal things is because that's what you signed up for, fucker.
Right. And, that was where I was going with the whole, when I bring up the whole affair thing, that's something from a military standpoint, in under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, adultery is a crime. It's not a hobby like in the world.
And I've been involved in sending people to prison for that.
Right. And you've got these people that don't understand that. They don't understand why it's a crime. They think it's some weird abstract concept. I'm like, dude, if we can't trust, if your wife can't trust you, how are you supposed to be trusted leading men? I mean, you can't keep your own vow with your wife. How are you going to keep your vow with your men when all of your lives are on the line?
Exactly.
Yeah, leadership, you start off as the first servant, so like NCO style, and then you learn, about preparation, inspiration, and fear. You got to you have the heart of a teacher. You got to be able to draw them a picture of a hopeful future, and you got to scare them a little bit, you will break them. And, and to me, and I think this is a very right-wing virtue that a lot of right-wingers don't have. It's like, I don't have to like you to give you what you deserve. Exactly. I can mete out justice, and you can be the biggest son of a bitch that ever walked, but if you did the work, I'm going to pay you for it.
Yeah, I can even hate you.
Yeah, women don't do that. That's not how women run civilization. Right. That's a very masculine way of running civilization. That's patriarchy. And
right.
Yeah, go on, Marcus.
Your military. I mean, in the military, it teaches you. You don't just when you punish a soldier, you're not just fucking breaking him. Pardon my language. You're not just breaking him down and leaving him shattered. You're when you punish him, you knock him down, but you've got to pick him back up and give him a chance to rebuild and improve himself. That's always the sign of a good leader when he's disciplining a subordinate. You've got to be able to rebuild that guy from his mistake.
Yeah.
That's why forever purges don't make any sense. I mean, you're basically creating an enemy camp, and you're sending guys right to that enemy camp.
Exactly.
This purging doesn't make any sense. You do limited punishments. You have limited objectives. It seems like these veterans had no problem in the Battle of Athens having a limited objective, and they didn't really need to, tar and feather the other guys involved once they had power, because the point was to have power.
Yeah, once they had power, they had power.
Yeah, it wasn't to feel good,
Yeah, they ran away because they knew they had power.
And that's another problem with the alt-right as a whole. You don't seem to have a union between these small objectives and the big picture.
Yeah.
Where are the limited goals, and how do these limited goals build up to an overall objective?
Exactly.
I think there's a breakdown.
Well, to be sort of playing devil's advocate a little bit, I think we're all trying to feel it out. This is a very new thing where we're kind of finding each other on the internet, and
exactly.
It's a hard problem. And I think also with Trump, there was a lot of hope and maybe a little bit unrealistic expectation that certain things would change. And I think people need to realize that, and I always sort of used to say this even before Trump got in, it's like you cannot expect someone who lives thousands of miles away from you to solve your problems. You can give him a little bit of support in some ways, he'll help, or whoever, but it's not going to magically give you a utopia. You have to build yourself and build locally, and then you can grow from there up, bottoms up.
Yet the irony of that, Adam, is someone who lives thousands of miles away is responsible for a lot of your problems.
Oh, I'm not saying it's not a problem, but I'm saying the solution is not putting more power into that guy who's far away.
Oh, I agree with you, man. But I'm just saying, like...
No, I mean, yeah. It seems like the game of modern life is they kind of want us deracinated and competing against each other because it drives down the value of our labor. And then, the big boys, political and economic giants, they're always consolidated and cartelized and working together. And we're always, divided. Yeah. And, the solution is, some sort of local, gathering together and not being inseparable. That's why I think colonies are, a destiny. I think that you got to rebuild society from the ground up. There's no real way to just fix it by meddling in the center.
Yeah.
Because the center has destroyed all our localities.
Yeah. This is usually the part where I start chilling for Fitzpatrick's War, saying this is the perfect manifesto of
yeah.
Well, it's an inside joke.
Well, that goes to that whole centralization thing. You've got people that really they don't want a bunch of tyrants in their business. And I mean, you deal with that in Athens. Is you had guys that, or at least say in East Tennessee during the Civil War, they'd rather have a tyrant far away who's not really going to directly hurt them, as opposed to like 100 tyrants like in their backyard. And that's sort of the thing that you got to worry about with a community. You can't just come in and upset and screw over their whole way of life, and turn it around on them. I mean, you've got to be that. You've basically got to be something that's more useful to them than that government that's far away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been thinking a lot about this, about like what is truly appealing about some alternative to the system, because the system has a lot to offer. At least it used to a lot more, but it offers you the dream of Hollywood and you got that nice office job, but the thing is, the reality is a disconnect from the portrayal. I mean, you cannot get an easy, stress-free office job these days. You're going to have that bitch HR manager. You're going to have to put up with political correctness. You're going to have to commute for 2 hours a day. You're going to struggle to buy a home. And so the system is failing to offer basic amenities. And I think that's a huge opportunity for people to basically just say, hey, fuck this. We're just going to do it ourselves. Grow our own food, teach our own children, whatever it may be that the system is not offering you. You do it yourself, but you'll find that you don't even have to pay taxes on it because you're not trading, or you're trading on a barter basis, and technically that's even the IRS has domain over that, but screw them. I mean, they're not going to know about handing somebody a loaf of bread. I mean, and there's so much more satisfaction in that when you have a connection with local people. So
well, that was how the Irish won their independence. I mean, if you read back on the story of Michael Collins and their resistance, the thing that won the war for them was they ended up replacing a lot of the standard services that the British had been providing. They showed up and were able to provide better services. I mean, they were providing a better postal service than what the British could afford.
Yeah.
And so it was patriotic to be a postman, I guess, in that Irish postal service. Is that right?
Yeah.
They felt pretty good about it. Yeah.
It is worth pointing out that just like the issue of why should somebody join the military, I mean, Michael Collins was originally a British postman. A lot of these guys had to learn those skills, in British agencies in order to build a better alternative. And that's still the issue with the U.S. military. We're going to need competencies that only come from the military. And unfortunately, there's only one game in this civilization where you can build those competencies.
Yeah, they centralized it and they took it over and made sure they were the only game in town. So you gotta play that game, but then you become very useful, from your time inside the system.
Yeah.
You finally become useful to yourself if we, can work together. I really like the Irish example that Marcus brought up because, we're basically, we're forced into these economic relationships with these cartels. I always use insurance as the prime example. They passed Obamacare not to save us money on insurance, but to cost us money. Yeah. It was written by the insurance companies.
It was an extraction plan.
Yeah, it's just economic rent. Mulcted, from the population using the gun of the state. Caesar's sword. And, so people use like those health shares, as an alternative, a way to get off the plantation. And so that they're actually providing a duplicate service that allows you to get out from paying that economic rent. And I think that's sort of the game. And, what the Irish did was they combined that with, are you a patriot? You need to get your mail with Irish instead of the British postal service.
Yeah, with the good one instead of the bad one.
Yeah, and people might even pay a little bit more at first for that, because they're employing, so and so down the street. I think that's the winning attitude, is that we got to duplicate, what the state is providing us in a very bad way.
Yeah,
we have to duplicate those services. I mean, we literally live in a country where the military is sent overseas to fight for no discernible reason whatsoever, just dark political objectives. Meanwhile, we're being invaded at home. Yeah. So what's the point in having the most expensive military the world has ever seen? They're not defending the country.
Yeah. Yeah. If you want a good closing, story, I was an advisor to the Iraqi army. They call it bilateral negotiations. It's basically learning how to work with an interpreter, and you get guys who are, Kurds and Iraqi Arabs to come in and do a fictitious scenario where you have another interpreter there, and you go through the. Long story short, I had to go through one where it was dealing with an Iraqi villager who said that they complained about people coming across the border. And again, this is training in Kansas, and the guy goes, "Would you allow Americans?" In America, would you allow just Mexicans to cross over your border at will? And I got in trouble for saying, well, you sound like a Republican. Yeah. So
they can't fathom how little nationalism we have in the United States.
Yeah.
Well, some of the best interpreters were like Chaldean Christians, and they were, they had a friggin' bone to pick, with the Arab Islamics. And they'd sit there and they'd tell you a lot of times, like, hey, this guy, don't trust him. He's lying to you. I can tell you why. And I mean, I've been raised up around these people, and I know when one of these Muslim fucks is lying to you.
That and a bunch of the older ones from them, and the Saddam's Air Force and their internal security service both employed a lot of Christians, because Christians, Chaldeans, and Assyrians have a reputation for being reliable.
Right. So I mean, that's a message for the alt-right. Instead of treating Christians like Jew worshippers, maybe realize that you might have a little bit more in common with him than that transsexual guy. You might want to team up with this Christian guy. Yeah, I know he worshipped this guy. It was a Jew, but I mean, come on, he might actually be more on your side than the tranny.
Are you insulting our furry allies, Marcus? I mean, you've gone.
I would never insult the furry allies. I'm sorry, I was talking about trannies.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
Furries. That's going to be the elite Republican guard of the new regime.
We're infamous for just having meandering conversations.
Yeah, we're meandering as fuck.
So we're going to talk forever until you guys tell us we've come to a conclusion.
Well, we were going to let you talk, but I wanted to ask you guys what you thought of how this all shook out. Because my understanding is that after Athens is over, veterans give back their guns. They one sheriff's deputy's arrested, goes to jail. Everyone in the town kind of hush-hushes about it. There's a few legislative reforms made. Elected officials in the county agree to take a $5,000 pay limit. Knox Henry is elected sheriff of McMinn County. Some other veterans get in. But my understanding is that within a few years, the Veterans Party, the GI Party, collapsed, and they were replaced by the same old Southern Democrat establishment again.
Well, since the 1970s, they're pretty hard Republican in East Tennessee, from my experience. And again, so it's the Memphis has a corrupting influence on the entire state. But I don't think, the Democrats would hardly have anything nowadays if it weren't for Memphis.
Yeah. Part of it is the challenge, the problem with a party that's based upon returning veterans is we did sort of become a garrison state, and I'll play Chalmers Johnson to say that we'd have, veterans coming back, but we didn't have the never-ending supply of veterans coming back every generation the way they had. So in some ways it becomes sort of a self-limited party that has to be co-opted into one of the two main parties.
One of the fatal flaws I've always seen in veteran political movements, particularly in the United States, is that there's always this trend towards, we don't necessarily want to give anyone the impression that we're angry enough to ever use force, and instantly you've deflated yourself. The one tool you have, you don't even have to use it. You can tell yourselves internally, we're not going to use it. We're not going to go that far. But there's never even ambiguity of whether or not they want to do anything.
Exactly.
There were a lot of veterans right after the Iraq War had already gotten underway, guys had already come back, guys who fought in Gulf War and so on, who had large movements in the early 2000s. Adam Kokesh came out of this. A lot of these kind of early libertarian vloggers and writers came out of this. And they always pointed to this fact that no one was ever willing to have a public stance. They had thousands of guys have a public stance. Like, if things don't start going the right way, we're going to have to step in. We're going to have to exert ourselves. We're going to have to assert our property, our capital, our knowledge.
You've got
the Battle of Athens is the one case, or one of the few cases, maybe outside of that, the Bundy Ranch incident in Nevada, where people have actually gotten together and said, we're going to hold a line against at least the local corruption. Taking on national or international corruption is sort of lofty and silly in some ways.
Yeah, I want to emphasize people should do it on a local basis. You got to remember the bonus army was a failure. They didn't. They may have gotten some concessions, but they were broken up, and a lot of very famous generals made their part of their career out of breaking those guys up. So pick your battles intelligently.
I think you're very correct, and that's part of the deal, right? Blacks. Every black political movement in the United States is based upon, we, them are mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore. And, everybody understands that black rioting is a real thing, because I think we've all dealt with it indirectly, if not directly, at some point or another. Whereas veterans, the people who are actually trained for violence, are never willing to even let the implied, possibility of a threat even be out there. So it's like we're self-neutering. So, that is the challenge now, isn't it?
Yeah. I've noticed that with Tennessee politics, because you got me to thinking, about how well, the Republicans are, resurgent, or they dominate the state now. But what does it matter? I remember, we had a Democratic governor that he was very good on gun rights. Surprisingly good, like stand up to the federal government good. And the Republican governor we had after him, he's been pretty worthless. He is just like a corporate cat's paw or something.
He's a Walmart Republican. He just sees everything as Walmart.
If I could add to that, that currently that former governor Phil Bredesen, there's a lot of talk that he's going to be running for Senate under the Democratic ticket coming up. So he's going to be running up against what's her name, Diane Black, I believe her name is, and she's not a very well liked Republican. So you're running up against a very popular, Democrat who has a lot of right-leaning stances. But I mean, ultimately, we're talking about a guy that is going to be a tool for the Democratic machine.
Yeah.
No matter what we think about him as a governor, because I thought he was a hell of a good governor, but he's not going to be a good senator, and
you're going to end up with another Jim Webb.
Yeah, I must apologize on behalf of we have Bob Corker. It's like, does it matter that these guys are Republicans? Because they're the worst enemies that we got. They're never Trumpers. They're Walmart Republicans, like you say. They'll cuck on our fundamental rights every day for $1. I know that these Republicans are supposed to be the principled, stupid party, but it doesn't seem like they're stupid, and it doesn't seem like they're principled. They do it for money.
Yeah.
I just go by the assumption that all senators are Democrats.
you about have to.
Well, I think that if anyone can take lessons from the Battle of Athens and what our fine Southern friends have discussed here, is that if you're going to take action, you're going to assert yourselves. If you're going to make a name for yourself, you got to do it at the local level. And fighting international politics or national politics is just not a worthwhile avenue at this point. There's no way, from a demographic standpoint, from a socioeconomic standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, that what's going to work in Tennessee is going to work in upstate Washington State.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there's aggregation fallacies that people suffer from. It's like, how can you have something good that is made up of bad parts?
Right.
Exactly.
We need some good parts, guys. We need some local victories. We're not going to go straight for DC and conquer it.
and if anything, you should learn from the Battle of Athens that what pissed off so many of the townspeople was their businesses being taxed. If you solve for people pocketbook issues, like, I'm going to make sure you're not being racketed anymore. Maybe now there isn't so much of like a Southern Democrat mafia. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But what they're probably mostly concerned about is local taxes, state taxes, sales taxes, VAT taxes. They're concerned with regulation. They're concerned with weird labor laws. If you can fix those kinds of things, that's a victory to get what's effectively the institutional mafia off of people's backs. Exactly. That's how you're going to have real progress.
You reminded me of another way that veterans are neutralized. A lot of them become police officers.
Yeah.
And, that's a great way to, you have to shut up about your politics now. It seems like veterans get a lot of jobs where they have to shut the heck up about their political beliefs.
Yeah, ironically, what drove the Battle of Athens was who could control the sheriff's seat in McMinn County. It was essentially who was going to be law enforcement. Now that kind of worked because it's at a local level, but
yeah,
you're right. They Knox Henry nullified himself because then he couldn't be a political radical anymore. He had to obey the law.
Yeah, and he still had a lot more leeway at the time because, again, this was Appalachia in the 40s.
Right.
Law enforcement wasn't bureaucratized. Whereas today, like Masonia says, the most radical and energetic elements a lot of times of returning veterans, law enforcement today is not some frontier justice system in Appalachia. What it is your you're a bureaucrat in an institution that requires you to deal out physical violence, but you're still a bureaucrat, which dampens everything.
Yeah, American law enforcement has become this sort of institutionalized death squad machine where people are filled with hollow point rounds just from making the wrong move when they're already laying on the ground, and there's police unions that are essentially ripping off taxpayers left and right and making it impossible to hire or fire a cop. And meanwhile, you have like total demonization of the police. It's just this weird dialectic that a lot of high agency veterans are throwing themselves into because it feels, I guess, familiar, or it's worthwhile pay that uses existing skills. But I gotta say, for any veterans coming home right now, if you're looking for employment, don't join the local police union. Don't become a cop. Don't get too involved in national radical politics and start trying to solve a local issue.
Yeah. Or just start a podcast. And that brings me to donations. Nick, do you have a couple people you can mention that were kind enough to drop a few coins in the collection plate?
Yeah, we had 2 recent donations. One from Ironic Sad Tire, and another from KH. Thank you very much to both of you. And thank you to our guests for joining us today. We've enjoyed this.
I hope you did enjoy it. I know we meandered all around.
Oh, no, it was a lot of fun. Trust us.
Yeah, well, I had a lot of fun.
This was invaluable to myself, at least, because I want to actually bring these historical examples to current events and see how it actually helps people's lives today, not just talk about them in the abstract. So I think it's very important we discuss what can we learn.
Yeah, that's definitely a good approach. I mean, the sort of after-action review. So what can we learn for our cause?
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, we do appreciate it. And sometimes I say things that ruffle people's feathers, in the movement overall. And, what can I say? I'm just that guy, but, I'm not in charge of anybody, and I'm not telling you to go to war for any certain cause, but, you just, the advice I give is, you need a job, you need a skill, you need to be educated to resist this friggin' Zog government, and you need to raise a family, and you need to instill your children with that same ethic so that they raise large families.
Yeah, that's families need help, and that's what Marcus. That's what Marcus is always about. It's these men actually have families and work hard. They don't have any help, and we should concentrate on that. But I don't mean to go on another tangent. But
you said it better than me, so thanks. I appreciate it.
He was raised in the swamp and back was smooth. He grew up eating rattlesnake meat, drinking homemade brew. Now folks hear about call him Gator, and everybody knows him well. Meanest man ever hit the swamp. Folks swear he come straight out of hell. Well, Gator McCluskey sitting on a stump, hammer pulled back on a 12-gauge pump, watching that swamp, looking out for the law while he make the best corn liquor you ever saw. Rotten good whiskey. While he's making that mash, he watches and he looks. Oh, Gator, he knows that swamp like a book. Something out there moving, Gator, what do you see? Ain't nothing but the snakes and the gators and me. Everything dokey-dokey, noke-pa-noke. That shelf ain't snooping around, so cook that moonshine down till it's good and clear. Everything dokey-dokey, noke-pa-noke. That shelf ain't sure mess around with the devil and to get yourself long messing around in here. One day he was cooking some mash. He was almost done when they spotted the law and they had to run. So he headed for the swamp and they followed him in. But the law might as well been chasing the wind. Look out for that snake, Sheriff. Well, they chased him on back through the muck and the slime, to the back of that swamp where the sun don't shine. But the law will never catch a gator, my friend, cause he knows that swamp like the back of his hand. Watch out, boys, old Smoke is in the Okefenokee. The sheriff's out there snooping around, so shut that business down and let's disappear. Look out, boys, old Smoke is in the Okefenokee. But that sheriff, he's really gonna catch the devil if he keeps on snooping around in here. Gators in the swamp, Sheriff. Go get him if you can.